Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking about a lot of the Hammer movies in recent weeks, so we're going to get the meat of the company, one of the best movies they ever did, and the unofficial kind of continuation of the Dracula motif within Hammer. This is the 1966 award-winning British Gothic supernatural horror film, Dracula, Prince of Darkness, directed by the great Terence Fisher, produced by Hammer. It's a third entry in Hammer's Dracula series, as well as second to feature Christopher Lee as Count Dracula, the titular vampire. It also stars Andrew Keir, Francis Matthews, and Barbara Shelley. Now, Technoscope production, beautiful color by Michael Reed, designed by Bernard Robinson, and scored by James Bernard. Now, this was an increasingly momentum for this movie was huge. When it first came out in January in the UK, didn't really do well in the first couple of weeks, but just built and built. Only £100,000 budget, made 2.345 million, so it was a big hit. Now, a prologue replays the final scenes from Dracula, 1958, in which Dr. Van Helsing destroys Count Dracula by sunlight. Only the memory of Dracula's evil remains. The main story begins as Father Sandor prevents local authorities from disposing of a woman's corpse, as it was a vampire. Sandor chastises the presiding priest for perpetrating the fear of vampirism and reminds him that Dracula was destroyed 10 years previously. Sandor visits an inn and warns four English tourists, the Kents, Diana, Charles, Helen, and Alan, not to visit Carlsbad. Now, ignoring his advice, the Kents choose to visit Carlsbad, but are abandoned by their fear-stricken coach driver 2 kilometers away from the destination as night approaches. If you watch a TCM version of this, a great scene. Finding themselves in view of a castle, the Kents are taken there by a driverless carriage and discover a dining table set for 4 people and their bags unpacked in the bedrooms. A servant named Clove explains that the master, the late Count Dracula, had ordered that the castle should always be ready to welcome strangers. After dinner, the Kents settle in their rooms. You know what's going to happen here. Later that night, Alan investigates the noise and follows Clove to the crypt, where Clove kills him and mixes his blood with Dracula's ashes, reviving the Count. Clove entices Helen to the crypt, where she becomes Dracula's first victim. The next morning, Charles and Diana, no pun intended, can find no trace of Alan, Helen, or Clove. Charles takes Diana to a woodsman's hut and then returns to the castle to search for Alan and Helen. Clove tricks Diana in returning to the castle. Charles eventually finds Alan's body in the trunk in the crypt. It is now dark and Dracula rises. Very effective scene. Diana encounters Helen, who, now one of the undead, attacks her. Dracula enters and warns Helen away from Diana, his bride. Charles struggles with Dracula until Diana realizes that her crucifix is an effective weapon against vampires. Charles improvises a larger cross and drives Dracula away. They escape from the castle in a carriage but lose control on the steep roads. The carriage crashes and Diana is knocked unconscious. Charles carries him for several hours through the woods until they're rescued by Father Sandor, who takes them to his abbey. Now, Clove arrives at the abbey in a wagon carrying 2 coffins containing Dracula and Helen, but is denied admission by the monks. By the order of Sandor, who knows that the vampires will try to gain entry. Ludwig, a patient at the abbey, is enthralled to Dracula and invites the Count inside. No description why, but it's just what it is. Helen convinces Diana to open the window and let her in. Good trope, claiming to have escaped from Dracula. Diana does so and Helen bites her arm. Dracula drags Helen off as he wants Diana for himself. Charles bursts into the room and drives the vampire out. Sandor sterilizes the bite with the heat from an oil lamp, then puts silver crucifixes in the 2 coffins to prevent the vampires from coming back. Sandor captures Helen and drives a stake through her heart, killing her. Ludwig lures Diana to Dracula's presence, where the Count hypnotizes her into removing her crucifix. Dracula coerces her to drink his blood from his bare chest, but Charles returns in time to prevent it, forcing Dracula to flee with the unconscious Diana. Again, very effective scenes, and the color is just beautiful. Now, Charles and Sandor arm themselves and follow on horseback, the typical chase. A shortcut allows them to get in front of Dracula's wagon and stop it. Charles shoots Clove, who's apparently removed Sandor's crucifixes from the coffins, but the horses gallop off to the castle, smart animals. Diana is rescued while Dracula's coffin is thrown onto the ice that covers the moat. Charles attempts to stake Dracula, but the Count springs out of his coffin and attacks him. Sandor shoots Again, sorry about that. Diana is rescued while Dracula's coffin is thrown onto the ice and covers the moat. Charles attempts to stake Dracula, but the Count springs out of his coffin and attacks him. Sandor shoots the ice and it breaks. Diana rescues Charles, and Dracula sinks into freezing waters and drowns. And we all know a vampire can have drowned. Let's set up for a sequel. The great screenplay was by John Sampson with the story by John Elder, produced by Anthony Nelson Keys, and again, music by James Bernard. Warner Pathé distributed that internationally. UK, again, 9th of January, 66. Rest of the world, 12th of January. Now, the cast, again, very effective. Now, Dracula does not speak in this film, save for a few hisses. So what's effective is Christopher Lee's style. According to Lee, I didn't speak in that picture. The reason was very simple. I read the script and I saw the dialogue. I said to Hammer, if you think we're going to say any of these lines, you're very much mistaken. Screenwriter Jimmy Sangster disputed that account in his memoir Inside Hammer, writing that vampires don't chat, so I didn't write him any dialogue. Christopher Lee has claimed that he refused to speak the lines he was given, so you can take your pick as to why Christopher Lee didn't have any dialogue in the picture, or you can take my word for it. I didn't write any, but seeing Christopher Lee's eyes bloodshot sums it up right there. Very stressed person. The film was written eventually to a novel by John Burke as part of his 1967 book, The Second Hammer horror film omnibus. Quite an interesting take on the movie, by the way. Now, filming took place at Bray. The film was made back-to-back with Rasputin, the Mad Monk, using many of the same sets and casts, including Lee, Shelley, Matthews, and Farmer. Shelley later remembered accidentally swallowing one of her fangs in one scene and having to drink salt water to bring it back up again because of the tight shooting schedule, as well as there being no spare set of fangs. The film was released in some markets as a double feature with The Plague of the Zombies, which I've covered before in the channel. Plaster of vampire fangs and cardboard zombie eyes glasses were distributed to audience members as a gimmick. Now, North America, the film earned $364,000. In France, the film drew nearly 1 billion people. The film was released with Plague of the Zombies, and according to Fox Records, the films needed to earn 1.5 million rentals to break even. It made 2.345, meaning it made a hefty profit. But in video release and other territories, it's probably the 5 million range. Now, Variety wrote that a picture should please the following of this type of film and do all right at the wickets. Fisher has directed it with his usual know-how, and a screenplay by John Sampson is a workmanlike job which provides a useful number of mild trills and little enough of the misplaced yokes that sometimes creep into the sort of pick. Now, Prince of Darkness has been well received by critics in more recent years, and it holds an 81% approval rate on movie aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes based on 21 reviews. Now, many people feel this is the number one Hammer movie, and according to Hammer Story, the authorized story of Hammer Films, called it perhaps the quintessential Hammer horror, but said that it contains little that audience hadn't seen before. But just like good comedy, it works. And Christopher Lee as the mute Dracula, just tremendous. Now, the film was one of the first Hammer horror films released on UK in DVD. More recently, on 19th of January 2012, Hammer announced on the Restoration blog that Studio Canal UK would release its own Blu-ray disc version of the film on March 5th of that year. The announcement stated it would be the chilling Dracula Prince of Darkness restored to Pinewood from a 2-perforation cut negative, scanned and restored in 2K. Dracula Prince of Darkness will be presented in all its Techniscope glory in an original aspect ratio of 2.35 to 1. Now, in U.S., Millennium Entertainment released the film as part of their Hammer horror collection, including in the set Legends of Seven Gold Vampires, Frankenstein Created Women, and is also available on a double feature regional 1 release, along with the standing rights of Dracula. Now, the Scream Factory released this on Blu-ray on the 18th of December 2018, which means you can find it in most places. Now, this movie was adapted in a 15-page comic story published in the House of Hammer in 1977, and it was also reprinted in Dracula Comic Special, published by Quality in 1984. Now, the idea about this movie, why it really works, we all know why. Christopher Lee. TCM has it every once in a while. Check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like our Hammer reviews, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share.